Hello everyone. Welcome to my teaching learning session. I am Sonal Singh Pawar, taking care again of counseling psychology, which is BPCE Block 2, Unit 4. Unit 4 is going to talk about theoretical approach, and we are going to first deal with the theoretical approach, which is psychodynamic approach, an approach which paid way to a lot of new concepts which were extremely different from the times of the early times also, and it's still very different when we talk about counseling and counseling psychology today. So what does the unit has? Let's go through as per the index. We would be speaking about the introduction of psychoanalysis. We are going to also speak about the in-depth and a long stretch of psychotherapeutic principles of psychodynamic, goals of psychoanalysis, what are the techniques of psychoanalysis, evaluation of psychoanalysis as a therapy. So we are going to talk about, as in counseling psychology, how does psychoanalysis as a therapy evaluates. And we are going to talk about a psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy, which is insight theory, and then the role of the therapist, the insight therapy, the goal of insight therapy, techniques within that, and evaluation also of the same, which is insight therapy. This is what are we going to finish and complete today in today's session. So let's begin with the introduction of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis was one of the way Sigmund Freud defined his model of therapeutic principles of psychodynamic. He stated that his psychoanalysis can be defined in three ways. One was that he stated that I have an entire model of human and human development personality, which is that he talks about that humans can be defined as per his model and also the human personality. He also gave theory of the personality, which is in terms of he gave the brackets of human mind and personality, and also a form of psychotherapy. So the model divides into three, which is a model of human personality, then the theory of human and human personality, and psychotherapy from that. So this was a very extensive range of therapy. Don't we realize Sigmund Freud first gives us a model to understand that how does the mind looks and how does the theory looks. Then that theory come in existence in the form of personality, functionality, and application. And then with that application, a psychotherapy was formed. A therapy which can be used for treatment, can be used for support of people's diseased mind. Also, in the present, we shall say that Sigmund Freud in Austria, being a Jew, was a very very young and a bright mind at that point of time, as he was an Austrian neurologist also, and a psychoanalysis can be seen. Sorry, he was an Austrian neurologist, Sigmund Freud, and psychoanalysis can be seen as a therapeutic technique which itself says that I go back to the unconscious, repressed thoughts and feelings and memories. Also, Freud's theory was based on observation of carefully done people who were his own clients. So Anna of Freud was one of the most, talked about, intriguing case that Sigmund Freud did. And his cases were more both qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative in terms of the fact that the method used were very quantitative, but the richness of data, the way the information was taken out was all qualitative. Also, he stated that his therapy talks about things that the other psychologists have not spoken of, like repressed feelings, pent-up emotions, the development of childhood experiences, which is extremely important. Also, at the same time, speech problems, partial paralysis, and many other causes behind the same. So he was one of those psychologists who dwelt into factors which others did not look into, especially unconscious, repressed feelings, and obviously the pent-up emotion which are coming from your unconscious, starting from your childhood times. So this was something which was very new. Also beginning with psychotherapeutic principles. So let's talk about the two things that he spoke very, very consistently, which was a part of his theory, which was the role of unconscious and psychic determination. So according to Freud, individuals are aware of a big portion of their functionality, of their mind, about their psyche, which he called the conscious. And a bigger portion that we are completely unaware of is the unconscious. So this is that portion of our mind that holds a lot of things, could be unfulfilled desires, wishes, wants, but we are not aware of it. So this is the unconscious, which he called comprised of three elements: the id, ego, and superego. And at least he stated that one of them was completely submerged in the unconscious, which was the id. The id was completely submerged in the unconscious. Also, in this way, Sigmund Freud stated that human actions were a result of unconscious desires. So, as I said, his entire focus was on the unconscious wishes and desires. This meant that all the actions that you do today, according to Sigmund Freud, all the actions, all the arguments, all the pain, the way that we respond are all coming from the unconscious wishes and desires, or probably our impending wishes and desires. So he stated that our actions are, defined by two: accidental and intentional. So accidental are a result of the unconscious wishes and desires, and intentional actions are, those wishes and desires which push you towards your achievements, your career goals, your helping attitude towards friends, which is again actually rooted in the unconscious only. This tendency to view human behavior as a result of something which is predetermined and not of a free choice is called determination, which is your actions, your behaviors, your ways of dealing with people, your zeal and your zest towards your work is all rooted from where, according to Sigmund Freud, it is rooted from the unconscious. So as you do not have a free will, it's a predetermined concept. We call this concept as determination. And when it is believed that it is the unconscious that defines and determines your behavior, it comes to a category which is called as psychic determination. The reason for psychic determination is the fact that we usually put out it from the unconscious. It's going to be a psychic determination. This is the concept which was given by Freud, defining that all our actions, all our behavior, all our concepts of life are dealt with, managed with unconscious. Then the structure of personality. Let's talk about this. Is one of the most how do you say this? This is one of the most important and a stepping stone sort of a thing, which was by Sigmund Freud. This is a structure of personality. This was a tripart theory, which is comprised of three elements, which was id, ego, superego. So this is the structure of your personality. Like what comprises of your personality, and what does it, the composition of it is. So id. Let's talk about id here. Id, according to Sigmund Freud, is a source of all psychic energy. It makes us a primary component of personality. So this one something which is big, something that our personality cannot survive with. And I would not say the building block as such, but it is one of the most primary component that we have. It is present right from the birth. So this is not something that you're requiring. We don't learn this. So this is something which is a part of us right from the time that we are born. Also entirely unconscious. As Sigmund Freud said, one of the elements is going to be completely submerged in the unconscious, and that submerged part is it. Completely in the, what do you call that? In the in the part of unconscious. It does not do anything thinkingly. It is very rebellious. It is something which would move and do in a way that might not be correct according to social values, would not think about rules, norms, and consequences, etc. So speaking of that, one is it is I want to do it right now. So when we speak about it, when we state it, it says that it would be something that people would end up being a part of, and not constantly assume that it is determined by something. So that's it, which is managed by the unconscious. We are driven towards it. It's completely submerged in the unconscious. The reason that it's completely submerged and we do not have any control over it, it's called the pleasure principle. Pleasure principle. Why? Because it gives you immediate pleasure. I want it right now. I want to gratify my need. So it could be a need, a desire, a want, a wish, which does not think about the pros and cons. If you find something lying in front of you, you'll pick it up. You will not think, whose is it? Is it morally correct? Should I be using it or not? But remember, if these needs are not satisfied immediately and we do not get into it, these are primal needs, the prime needs of hunger, thirst, and sex. If you do not immediately, if it comes to your mind, do not gratify it, remember it causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of tension in the mind. So the reason these are called pleasure principles are, if a child is not given a cookie that he or she desires to eat, the child cries, howls, and brings the entire area on his head because of the tension and anxiety which is being caused to the child because he does not get the id. or the child does not, it does not get the it, which is completely a part of the unconscious. This finishes with it speaking and giving a revision again. It is completely a part of the unconscious. It's submerged in the unconscious. It is a pleasure principle. And at the same time, when we speak about pleasure principle, it needs to be gratified right now, right here. We cannot make any changes. We cannot, when we talk about changes, as in we cannot we cannot really make any decision of our own. The mind doesn't really work. Then we come to something which is ego. According to Freud, the ego develops from the id only. So it's like something that you need to know, uh, which we at times do not agree to, but we need to know this. The We need to know that the ego comes out from the id. It develops from the id, ensures that the impulses of the id can be expressed in in a much acceptable and a understandable manner that we have. So it's in the real world in a more acceptable manner that we all could be take care of our id, manage our id, achieve our id at the same time, and it does not cause us anxiety. So what does the ego does? Ego is usually the function in the conscious, pre-conscious, and the unconscious. So it's not completely in the unconscious. It comprises of all the three things that we have. Then ego is the personality component responsible for dealing with reality. So ego is that personality component that deals with how the world works and functions. That's why it's not completely driven by the unconscious. Because if it's going to be completely driven by the unconscious, it will be like the id. That's why ego is something which is dealing with reality. It like that, like the same term, it is based on reality principle, which will strive to satisfy your id. It will look forward to satisfy the id in a realistic and socially correct manner. But remember, in reality, the principal way the cost and the benefit of the action and deciding upon the impulse. If there's a drive that is immediately there, the id will do it there and then. But the ego will satisfy that desire, but with time and with patience and with a reality check. So it will see that if it's socially correct, if it's realistically acceptable, and give it time and give it a thought, which is, measure the pros and cons. So that's what we suggest as the ego, which is based on the reality principle. Now let's come to the last, which is called the superego. This is the last component. According to Sigmund Freud, superego also usually emerges at the age of 5. The reason now it's emerging, that means it's been acquired and it's being learned. According to Sigmund Freud, also it holds the internalized moral standards and values which are given by our parents, who make us socialize in the social environment and tell us that how does the society works. It is our sense of right and wrong given by the society. It is internalized by the society to us, which is our parents internalize it on us, and it is acquired. That's why it comes out around at the age of 5. You're not born with it. Superego obviously makes judgment. It provides guidelines of what is right. These are the patterns that you need to do. Else, if you do not do, it's wrong. You would be someone who is a guilty person. So superego tells us the right and the wrong of the world. Also, the fact that it tells us the right and the wrong of the world, that's why it's called the morality principle. So let's just quickly go through the id, ego, superego once again, and I'll give you a state of example 2 of that. It is the pleasure principle, ego is the reality principle, and superego is the morality principle. Let's understand how does it work. I'll give you an example. I'll give you 2 examples. Let's take an example. A child finds a chocolate lying on the floor. Now the child quickly picks it up, does not ask anyone, does not take any permission, and just quickly eats it up, opens it and eats it, and throws the wrapper in the dustbin so no one sees it. This would be the id, the immediate gratification of need that does not command for the gratification of needs and desires. Then coming to the next is the fact that if a child sees a wrapper there and feels that this is not my chocolate, I probably will not touch it and just passes through it. That's called the superego, where the child does not look forward to the chocolate, does not even pick it up out of the fact that I am not allowed to pick up other people's items and objects. Then moving ahead, we have the ego. Now in the ego, what will happen? The child sees the chocolate, goes to the mother and sees that this is a bare, lying bare chocolate over there, and someone will crush it. Can I please pick it up? whenever there are permissions involved, which makes you just go away from the guilt and the tension and the pain, it's called the ego, because it's the reality principle. So that's what is, the child takes permission, the mother says fine, let's wait for another 2 3 minutes. If someone doesn't come, that we can pick it up, inform the guard that you've taken, as someone was not there, and if someone comes, then we'll deal with it. So that's what ego is, which is the reality principle. Now, coming ahead, superego comprises of two parts. When we speak about superego having two parts, there's a conscience and there's an ego ideal that we have. When we talk about the conscience talks about information about things that are viewed as bad by the parents and society. And these behaviors often are forbidden and leads to consequences. So these are something which your parents have told are not good, and if you do it, what is going to happen? You're going to be punished. You're going to be left alone. There's going to be a high sense of guilt if you do it. So that's the conscience which is given by the parents and the society. What is the ego ideal? It includes the rules and the standards for behavior that the ego aspires to. So ego ideal is the kind of idealistic standards that the ego provides us with. So that's the reason it's called the ego ideal. So superego comprises of two parts that we spoke about. According to Freud, remember, all the intra anxiety results in the intrapsychic conflicts. So speaking of that, always remember, when we look at this picture ahead, there's an id, there's a superego, and there's an ego. When we talk about the id, it is completely submerged in the unconscious, and the ego is a part of all. It's a part of unconscious and the conscious and the preconscious. Superego also is a part of the id quite a much, but it's also a part of the conscious and the preconscious. So according to Freud, when these three are fighting, at time begin fighting for domination, that it's the id who's going to win, or the superego, or the ego, it does lead to a lot of anxiety, it does lead to a lot of guilt, and it leads to intrapsychic conflicts because of the fight between the id and the superego. Now, here Freud described there are three kinds of anxiety which are based on dominating. Who's dominating? If the id dominates, what it leads to. If the superego dominates, what it leads to. So see, intrapsychic conflicts will come in when there's a huge amount of conflict and the conflict is not satiated. If the id ego does not work properly and the id ego is not able to manage your gratification, you make you feel guilt free. If it does not happen in the same context, it's going to lead a lot of anxiety. Now there are three kinds of anxiety that you have. When superego begins to dominate the ego with the demands, and the individual fears violating the moral rules and rituals, and feel, no, I should not be doing this, I've been told this is not a part of my my ritual, this is incorrect, this is called the moral anxiety. You want something but you're not doing it because it's morally incorrect. Then when the urge of the id grows so intense that it surpasses everything, loses control, and just completely take over, which is your id is constantly functioning, that's called the neurotic anxiety. When the ego and the superego is not able to manage you. Then comes when the anxiety is completely based on the real world, where you make the person wait all the time, give them the pros and cons, and the anxiety completely based on real life events like earthquake and a snake in the room, an insect in the room. This is called the reality anxiety. So these are three kinds of anxiety that we all go through. You can just check what kind of anxiety do you go through most of the time. Is it a reality, a morality, or a neurotic anxiety which is coming extremely because of it? So if it's a id-related anxiety, remember, you will lose control. There's going to be a lot of aggression, arguments, fights, and it's all going to be about you. Then coming ahead, we talk about something which is a usual concept of Sigmund Freud, which are defense mechanisms. What are defense mechanisms? Ego makes use of different kind of defenses to protect you from being overwhelmed during the times, when the ego anxieties are happening, and when id is trying hard to, pressurize ego to gratify their need. So at that point of time, ego is not just going to make sure that it manages the pros and cons, delays the time, but there are some other defense mechanisms and strategies that are used unconsciously to ward off the anxiety arising from the unacceptable thoughts and feelings. So let's dwell into all of them with the help of examples. First is denial, refusing to accept real life events which has happened because they're unpleasant. So let's take an example which is mentioned here. Kella refuses to admit that she has an alcohol problem, and she is unable to single a day without drinking excessively. So she completely denies that she has a drinking problem despite she's been drinking every day. Then we have displacement. Displacement is transferring your inappropriate urge and your anxiety from the main point to an alternated source. So you're displacing it to an acceptable source. So during lunchtime, Mark is angry at his older brother, but he does not express this, but verbally abuses the waiter. We all do this. We all do this. We are angry with our friends, and we bush it out and we take it out on our parents. So that's displacement. Displacement is quite often happening, not only in teenagers. I feel it only also happens in adults, and also children are making use of it. Children also make use of denial a lot of times. They simply deny the event happening. So yes, denial is something which is starting from children itself. Then we talk about projection. Projection usually deals with major crucial problems, and it is attributing unacceptable desires to the others. So your unacceptable desires are attributed to the others that you have. So that's projection, which is Chris often cheats on her boyfriend because she suspects that he is already cheating over her. So this is like you're assuming and you do that thing, which is you are projecting your own wishes and desires onto the other person. Then there is rationalization. Rationalization is a simple keyword, excuse making. Justifying behavior by substituting acceptable reasons for less acceptable real reasons. So Kim failed in his history course exam because he or did not study or attend classes, but his roommates that he failed because he did not like the professor. So it's like you're rationalizing by saying that I did not like the professor. Also, we can rationalizing by saying the paper was so difficult that everyone failed. That's again excuse making that we have. Then there is reaction formation. We can remember this defense by, we manage our anxiety by doing exactly the opposite. Like, I'll give you another example of real life, apart the one which is given of Nadia. We want to be a part of, what do you call this? We all want to be, a part of groups which are popular, part of, groups which have popular kids in school or in college. Despite we dislike the main person, the person who is running the group, we completely dislike them. But what happens is that despite disliking them, when people ask us why are you part of this group, you will end up saying, oh, I like the main person here. He's amazingly humble and great. That's why I'm a part of this group. This is called reaction formation. So we can just read out the example. Nadia is very angry with her co-worker Beth for arriving late to work for a night after a night of partying, but she is nice and agreeable to Beth and affirms that partying is also a cool thing. So what are we doing? We are reaction formatting everything. Then we talk about regression. Regression is returning to coping strategy for less mature early stages. This is something I feel all the adults do and teenagers also do. Whenever they're told that they should not be going outside, what do? They cry, they close the door, they don't have their meals. This is regressing towards an older age, older age of management to deal with that situation. So after failing to pass his doctoral exam, Georgia spends days in bed cuddling his favorite childhood toy. Again, regressed to the older times for managing anxiety and overwhelming feeling. Then repression, suppressing painful feelings and thoughts, which is example where you tend to suppress it, put it away. So, which is Leisha cannot remember the grandfather's fatal heart attack, although she was present there. Something which is very painful, you tend to repress it, try to forget it. This is also called repression. Is also called as motivated forgetting. You try to forget because it's unpleasant, it causes a lot of anxiety, etc. Then we have sublimation. Sublimation is redirecting unacceptable desires through a socially acceptable channels. This is something which is happening in Indian society so much. People do so much of crime and they end up providing charity to the world. What do? You are making up for your unacceptable desires by doing something which is socially acceptable. Giving charity to people, giving huge amount of money for fatalistic diseases of theirs, or diseases which can be not cured by their own finances. So that's something that we speak about as sublimation. Now let's understand defenses, knowing that they all are present. Why does defenses happen? Defenses happen when anxiety, the pain, the guilt is too much to be dealt with. Then the defense, it's also called the ego defense mechanism. Ego feels stressed, ego feels burdened because, at times the id mechanisms are so high that it has so much of what do you call this, so much of anxiety, because he or she wants to gratify a need, and to gratify that that the ego is functioning, the ego is trying to make its way, but they're not able to do it. So what do? They make use of a defense mechanism. Remember, excessive use of defense mechanism is not healthy. It can lead to a diseased mind. So excessive use of defense mechanism is also very inappropriate. Now, moving to the goals of psychoanalysis. So, if psychoanalysis is done, what was its goal and what is the role of the classical psychoanalysis? See, the goal of psychoanalysis is resolution, lying in the understanding and resolution of the unconscious conflict. So, major part, don't you realize a major thing is to get out the unconscious conflicts to the periphery, strengthen the ego, reduce the intensity of the instinct striving, which is reduce the instinctive drives of the id, as well as the demands of the superego, and facilitate the insight into one's unconscious. So, the goal of the psychoanalysis is to deal with the fact that they tell you and make you aware of your unconscious and tell you how does the id ego superego function. This results in a better adjustment and better coping in life. When you know how incidences in your life are being worked upon, that's how you're able to have an insight of how aggression, arguments, frustration comes to you. Also, it also provides a lot of insight, which is makes you it gives you a lot of self-awareness and self-realization. The two terms are very important: self-realization and self-knowledge that occurs and when the client gets in touch with their unconscious mind and is unable to connect with the past experiences and conflicts with the present problems and behavior. So that's something which is insight. Then, speaking of role of the classical psychoanalysis, is that of an expert. Psychoanalysts are, mostly they're very, very trained. Also, we find that psychoanalysts are very detached. They do not attach to the problem. They do not attach to the person in concern. They're very distant. Neutrality and absenteeism are two of the central stances which is adopted by the classical psychoanalysis, which is, we don't indulge in too much. Too much of neutrality is something that we put out, which is fostering a blank screen, even in your body posture, etc. So the approach is with little disclosure and affective expression. We are not emotionally involved. We do not even express affective sense. There is a least amount of self-disclosure here. Least amount. Also, analysis, subjective experiences and reaction to the client are considered to contaminate the therapeutic process. So the reason that the psychoanalysis expressions are not entertained, the reason is that it spoils the entire therapeutic approach and therapeutic alliance. Therefore, the analysis actually sticks to the rule of abstinence. Adhering is sticking to the rule of abstinence, that is avoiding expressing too much of emotion, giving too much of advice, displaying too much of their own issues. We are abstaining, and usually psychologists should abstain, but I feel the role in terms of classical psychoanalysis, they're a little too much in terms of they do not express a bit of their emotions, bit of their ideas, their thoughts completely. No. Therapist's main task is understanding interpretation of the unconscious material, and making sure that this unconscious material is thoroughly understood by the client. Now, moving to the techniques of psychoanalysis that we have, and knowing that psychoanalysis is not a client-centered therapy, it's a more approach-driven therapy. We focus on the techniques more than the clients being at the center. So, understanding that, we need to know that this is not one of those therapies that you will find you put the client at the center, discuss everything about them. No, here the approach, the pattern of the approach needs to be at the center. We go as per the approach, so we need to stick to it. Also, interpretation is one of the most key approaches in psychoanalysis, as it is a part of all techniques as we go ahead. Also, it comprises of explanation of the analysis or to the client with respect to their behavior based on the theory of psychoanalysis. So interpretation is something interpreting whatever has happened in the unconscious, getting it out on the peripheral area, then integrating the past with the present behaviors, and then telling them these were the symptoms of your emotion conflicts and the feelings that you had, and then associate them that this is how you dealt with it today. So it's like interpretation is your ability to interpret the unconscious feelings and desires. That's the reason here abstinence is followed, so that the client is, so, the therapist is solely able to understand that where is this unconscious conflict coming from, getting it to the periphery. And once it comes to the periphery, aligning it from the past, that which stage it might be a part of. Is it a part of childhood, the 1-2 years of stage, the anal stage, the oral stage, is the phallic stage of the child when the child is learning the difference between sexes, etc. So this is one of the most crucial part where we also make them understand the role of id ego super ego, how most of your emotional challenges are uh, a part of this, how your behaviors come out of because of id ego super ego. So interpretation, I feel, is one of the most important technique that we have. Then we have free association. Speaking of free association, yes, we can come up to the fact that free association talks about that Sigmund Freud's concept of lying on the couch and speaking whatever comes to the mind without applying reasoning. The major aspect of free association is to allow, the client to be able to speak whatever comes to his or her mind without without making them conscious about it, without putting a censor to their sort of thoughts, feelings, and desires. At times, they are able to, because of this, they are able to recall childhood memories, some difficult experiences of the past. So the key here is what? Allowing the client to speak whatever comes to his mind, but suspend the rational judgment. We suspend the judging aspect, the criticism, the censorship is suspended. When you suspend all of that, remember the client feels actually associated with the situation. They feel no one is judging me. I can speak whatever comes to my mind. So repressed material comes out because of this. The repressed material, which is a part of the unconscious, further gets released. And this is like a typical, as mentioned, psychological prolapse in this, that the id that speaks and the ego is silent, is in the repressed in some extent. So when you, does not allow, when you do not allow rational judgments, when you do not censor anything, when do not make it critically burdening on the client, remember the id will speak. The id will speak that this is what I wanted and it did not happen. So this also results in catharsis, which is a release of intense emotion. So free association allows you for putting out a lot of feelings and emotion which is repressed in you. And remember, catharsis does happen in the same pattern of Sigmund Freud, which is mentioned on a rugged couch. The client is allowed to lie on it and speak whatever comes to his mind, like the word says, freely associating. So major classic themes, free association, as the couch is also seen here. And if not the couch, there's a bedding which is there, which allows you to, report to all the feelings and thoughts that are a part of your mind and associate to them freely. There are a lot of other things that we will come down to after free association, which is an important one, which is called the resistance. Resistance is paramount. I feel it's extremely important. The reason for the same is, once you're able to associate and once you're able to, give out everything which is a part of your unconscious, now the time comes that we feel very cautious. Your client feel cautious that, okay, I told them everything that I wished for, that I desired for, to my, to my person. Then they feel very cautious about the fact that, oh God, what to do? Now everyone knows about the fact that, my wishes and desire at the age of 5 was this. My wishes and desires at the age of, 4.5 and 6 was this. And 6, I felt like this. They feel guilty and they feel a little shameful about it. So during the progress, resistance come as an against of the therapy. So it's moving in the opposite direction and it happens unconsciously. Resistance is not something that you're doing it consciously. It happens unconsciously. How? When you feel that there's a sense of reluctance in the therapy, you sidetrack discussion, you come late to the therapy, you refuse to call back to your therapist, you refuse to remember the childhood dreams and wishes. Now you change the shift the topic of discussion, postpone session, do not pay the fee. These all are happening unconsciously and they are interpreted as resistance. Resistance is equally important. And now the next part would be the analysis. Psychoanalysis needs to deal with this resistance immediately. The client might or might not be aware of his or her resistance. We need to interpret this, make them realize that this is something that you're going through, and what are the reasons. There are something that we are planning to discuss and you want to avoid it. So that's more painful, has to come to the limelight. That's why resistance happen. I'll give you an example. When you are speaking to your friend and your friend gets uncomfortable in some topics, remember that's the most sensitive topic that they're trying to avoid. They don't want to speak about it. That's the core topic that you should be talking of. Then we come to another technique, which is dream interpretation. Dream interpretation is not making the client go to sleep over there. It's about discussing the materials of the dream in the session. So it was said that the dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. It provides, it's a disguised way to all the unconscious material that you have. Because some dreams are traumatic, unacceptable, there are painful ones, there are conflicting, darker dreams. So dreams represent the symbolic expression where we use these symbols to interpret that what are you experiencing. The process of which the ideas, memories, and wishes repressed become safe for expression. The expression is but not is disguised as direct expression to what painful your ego might be experiencing. So it's like the reason that we ask our subjects, our clients, to discuss dreams and put it on the outlay is that we get to know what are they dealing with. These are the unconscious wishes and desires, and they are being marked and masked by ego. The ego is trying to deal with these wishes and desires. Thus, dreams could actually fulfill wishes and desires or need, which were too threatening to fulfill in the reality. So, running around, experiencing that fear, when you're not able to deal with it in the real world and you have to curb it down because of the reality principle, which is ego, it's all experienced in the dream. Dreams are actually the royal road to the unconscious, which is rightly said. So the symbols are interpreted, understood, discussed, and then made. The same insight is given to the client. There are two kinds of content in the dreams, the manifest and the latent content. Manifest is the actual content of the dream. What did you actually experience? I had a falling dream, I had a running dream, manifest content. The latent content is the hidden meaning of the dream, usually which is analyzed and stated by the psychoanalyst. Examples, falling dream, maybe pain of height, fear of heights, feeling you feel out of control in life, giving it away to the temptations. That's something which is to the falling dreams. Running dreams would be filled with anxiety, fearful of something, not want to confront a situation. Those are running dreams in the dark. So these are latent content, the hidden content of the dream. So two parts the dreams are divided into latent and manifest content. Then there is transference and interpretation, which talks about transference and another technique which is called the counter transference. Transference is one of the most important part. Let's understand. We enter a psychoanalysis session. We have a lot of information that we discuss, which is free association. The free association gets all the unconscious material on the on your periphery, which is it gets to the conscious level. After it comes to the conscious level, we need to ideally interpret it. If interpretation helps you understand the dream, we give them insight. That doesn't happen. There are times that there are resistance happening. We deal with the resistance. And there are at times none of this happening, but we are leading to another technique, which is called transference. This technique deals with the relationship between the client and the analysis. So transference occurs when the client redirects onto the counselor their emotional response to the past significant relationship, often unconsciously. So let's take an example. There has been a dominating father or a punitive mother, a mother which has been troubling the child at the times, and the wishes and desires of that time pain. Those emotions are now falling once you help them free associate through dreams, make them realize this is where you stuck. You tend to do what? You tend to use that material and that emotional response. You throw it on the therapist. So it happens unconsciously, and once this happens, it's called transference. You're transferring the emotional feeling from the object, which is from whoever it is, the dominating father, punitive mother, to your client. In this context, the emotional response to the counselor could be a mother, a father, or a sibling. As I said, the transference feeling are not based on real relationship, but the client therapist relationship, which is operating at an unconscious level at that point of time. It is the pattern which are we trying to reproduce. And yes, at time transference can be very cathartic when you keep talking to your client like that, and your client keeps talking to the therapist in the same emotional tone. We get to know what was the pain that the client was going through. It can be both a positive transference. It can be also a negative transference. Positive transference can reflect a lot of love towards the therapist, respect towards the therapist, and negative transference can be frustration, attitude, throwing aggression towards the therapist. So transference can be of both the kind. Remember, transference can also be paternal and maternal. Paternal coming from the father and the maternal coming from the mother's side. So it could be could be a part of any kind of transference like this, which happens, which is transference. A client's unconsciously projecting feeling towards of about the significant person towards the therapist. This technique is extremely important to happen. If it's need be, if you're not interpreting or the dream and free association does not manages it, transference are extremely important. Transference usually takes your your analysis and your client relation to the other level and provides a greater amount of insight. Remember, if transference is happening, there's another kind of technique which is happening, which we just mentioned on the back, which is counter transference. This is where the therapist emotionally reacts to the client, which may relate to the triggering of the therapist's own unresolved issues. At times, counter transferences also happen. This brings to us to another technique. This can be seen when the clients transfer his or her feelings of the past to the present relationship of the client. Counter transference are induced on the therapist and can also be utilized. Understand the client's issues better at times. The way you react tells the client that, see, at that point of time, this is the kind of reactions that you might have had. So that's the deeper understanding of the problem. Then let's evaluate now. Understanding these are the techniques how Sigmund Freud understood, which was we use techniques like interpretation, free association, dream interpretation. We also use transference and counter transference to understand the client's condition and then provide them something which is an emotional insight. Now, if let's evaluate their therapy. See, it is an extensive therapy, but remember, it cannot be used for some solution-focused problems and brief problems. So it's a long therapy, goes on for years. Cannot be used for everything, not for a problem-focused context. No, it is anonymous and detached. Here, the therapist is very anonymous and detached. At times, you do not get to know what your therapist is trying to say because you're so detached. Also, the therapist approach is mostly available in urban areas because it's an expensive therapy, cannot be given to all. And here the exploration and working through all of this is not suitable. It cannot be done with the people of the middle and the lower class at times. It's limited only the lower middle class and the lower class. It's only restricted to the upper classes. Also, the clients have ego strength. They can engage in therapies, which is a part of it. And psychotic concerns are better addressed here also. It is not useful for older clients because it's, older clients have memory lapses. They are very lethargic. They need a very active therapy, not something that can freely associate. They go into dreams. No, not for them. Not for them at all. This is how counter transferring function. Remember, see a beautiful diagram that I have on the board, which is transference and counter transference. That's how it completes the entire chain of the therapy. Another evaluation not very effective in crisis and bewilderment. It is not. It requires a very rigorous training in the counselor. It's quite costly, time consuming. Goes on for 1 year. Requires a thorough emotional commitment. You have to stick to it to 1 year. It's a very very long therapy. Highly deterministic in nature. Ignores the cultural, social, and other factors. So we do not consider social factors and cultural factors here. Also, psychoanalytic cannot it does not justify the empirical means completely. It's very qualitative in nature. So that completes with something which was psychoanalysis. Remember, psychoanalysis gives us emotional insight, an insight that we give same amount of self-awareness and self-knowledge given to the client itself. Now, the similar kind of psychoanalytical therapy was insight. Insight was largely based on psychoanalysis, and it's a kind of form of therapy where insight is given to the client. Very similar to psycho. It's quite similar to something which we talk about in terms of psychoanalysis. The origin is also becoming aware, becoming self-aware, and understanding of the problems. The therapist's task is to help client understand how their beliefs, thoughts, feelings, and experiences and life events from their past and the present concerns matter. So again, this kind of gets your belief, past, and feelings and knowledges from the past, and it helps you deal with it. the past that was buried, that we did not have an awareness of. So we give an insight of that and integrate it to the present. So it's very similar to psychoanalysis. It has different kind of insight therapy: psychoanalytical insight therapy, psychodynamic, gestalt, humanistic, and existential. And this is what therapy is good for: academic failures, professional access, for depression, a relationship issue, anxiety, sleep problems, fear, confusion. Insight therapy is amazingly good for all of these things because it's a very quick therapy, quicker than the psychoanalysis that we have. Then, speaking of goals of insight therapy, goals of insight therapy is again, giving you an insight of your unconscious fears and desires, your unconscious motivations, and getting them all to the conscious level. Let's divide into three patterns. The goals at the childhood time, it's like going back to the childhood patterns where the childhood is central in the psychoanalytical insight therapy. A person's childhood can have a significant impact on their life. So we go back to those experiences that have shaped us, shaped our values, shaped our personality, beliefs, and thoughts. So it's like going back to that time. Then there is abuse, experiencing some kind of physical sexual abuse that might in the past might have also come up during insight therapy. So another goal is this: getting, giving, um, awakening the kind of abuse that a person might have gone through and they have repressed it. Then there are struggles in the interpersonal relationship, troubled relationships with the colleagues, with the family, struggles of managing the house, financial concerns, all rooted in difficulty with partner, parents, and caregivers while growing up. So this all is come uplifted. We give an insight. Insight, remember, can be both emotional and social. It can equally be intellectual, and at times insight does not lead to any behavioral change. Does lead to just cognitive changes. Also, insight give you a revelation of your maladaptive defenses that you utilize incorrectly. Like denial as a defense is not very good, and you keep using it. Displacement, so it gives you an awareness of that. Also gives you an awareness of conflicted emotions and feelings, and something also it also tells you that some feelings and motivation that has not been met and has causing concerns to you in the later times. So that's something which is underlying motivations and relationship patterns that we need to understand. So the goal, imagine, of the insight therapy can be largely understood in one ways: giving you an insight and awareness of the factors that has led to difficulties of unconscious fears, unconscious desire, which are causing problems in today's life, which could be from the childhood, can be from any sort of abuse, could be from past struggles in relationship, interpersonal and troubled relationships. Insight can be both behavioral and cognitive, and insight can give you a lot of revelations can give you a lot of information of the ways that you've been utilizing your mechanisms and way of living incorrectly. So that is something that we talk about in terms of insight therapy's goal. Now, techniques in insight therapy very similar to Sigmund Freud's therapy. There is an interpretation where interpretation helps the client reach an insight. We interpret anything which is coming from the past, get those symptoms, make the symptoms appear more manageable. Insight is more empowering to the client, remember, gives a lot of clarity. So what do? We link the past experiences to the present, tell them that how the past experiencing are shading your present experiencing and causing you symptoms of today, gives you insight and clarity of today's problem, and gives you a lot of self understanding. So it's very empowering when you are able to relate to your past and present and changes, and able to comprehend your past life experiences better. Then transference interpretation, which is, there is an interpretation in insight therapies also in the same sense of psychoanalytical sense, involves understanding of the recurrent maladaptive relationship pattern. Transference is again the same thing. When the client is able to transfer their feelings of the past onto the therapist. So that's like a key technique here, and because it's one of the basic technique. Once that happens, we implore. So it's an imploration of affect. One different thing in insight therapy is imploration of affect, which is emotional insight. Requires an exploration of both affective and emotional process of memories. So here we are able to not only help them support only the information or intellectually understand the problem, but also emotionally understand the problem, emotionally associate to the problem, which is, empowered us a self-awareness. So it tries to emotionally connect you from the troubled childhood times, also emotionally connect to the fact that the abuse that you might have had, the troubled relationships, and that emotional baggage is then transferred and interpreted further. That gives you an like exploration. Exploration is a burst of information coming to you. But again, there are some criticisms. Sounds very good to give an insight therapy to somebody, but criticism is inside therapy might at times generate placebo effect. You might feel that this is happening because you've encountered a therapeutic alliance, you've had a therapeutic relationship, but this could be deceptive. It could be illusionary. It could be just a self understanding of the problem. It might not be something which is really an emotional insight. So there could be a placebo effect that you would go through. Once we go to a therapy, we feel our problems are solved. That's the placebo effect. So an illusion of self misunderstanding, which does not possess any explanatory power, at times, according to Jopling, was one of the most biggest criticism of insight therapy. This completes with Unit 4, and let's have like a quick introduction of Unit 5 to us, which is again a part of BPCE, Counseling Psychology Block 2, an existential and humanistic approach. This is a part of those therapies that we are going to talk about, which is going to be different from psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis, let's differentiate the two once we start with the index of this also. Psychoanalytical would approach-based therapy. So speaking of approach-based therapies that are associated to sticking to the pattern, assuming that you will be the expert who gives out all the answers, solve all the problems, and give the insight to the client. In humanistic therapy, that's not the thing. Here, the people are more client-centered. Here, these are the approaches which are client-centered. Here are the approaches where we say that we empower the client. So empowering the client, actually, I feel is very fittedly right connect to these therapy, which is existential and humanism. As the word suggests, existential and humanism are restricted to concepts like this also, which is it is connected to understanding, dealing to such concepts, which is where we provide meaning making to life. We remove crisis of existence. We make people feel more positive about themselves. It was given by people like that also. Speaking of that, humanistic, let's understand the difference between the two here. Well, once we do, we'll also do the difference. Speaking of humanistic and existential approach, here the people are not the expert who gives out the solution. They are the expert, but not the expert to give out the solution to you ready-made in your hand. Like psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis did most of the job for you. In humanism and existential, the job is done by the client. The client deals with it. The client learns it. The client is facilitated, so the power remains with the client here. There, the power remains with the therapist. And here, the therapies are way shorter than the psychoanalytical therapy, psychotherapies. They go on, psychoanalysis go on for years at times. So it's more restricted to those genres which can take it up for a longer time. It's cost expensive, very time consuming. These are short, crisp, solution focused, very human oriented, very human oriented. So let's begin with this. We're going to talk about the objectives, the introduction. We are also talking about the first therapy that we are going to talk here is the existential therapy. We are going to talk about the role of existential counselors. We are going to talk about the techniques and strategies, which is what strategies do we use here. We are again going to evaluate these therapies. That are these therapies actually having no criticism and they work well for most of the problems? And then we come to another kind of therapy after existential, which is called the client-centered therapy. The role of the counselor is also going to be discussed here. We are going to look into the strategies and technique used by the client, and we are going to finally again evaluate. Evaluation is extremely important to understand that what are the pitfalls. Are they a perfect therapy? No therapy is perfect. Psychodynamic, despite being such an extensive contribution to psychology and counseling psychology, where they gave three models of human personality. They gave the structure of mind, the stages of human personality, and the psychotherapy. Despite that, there are a huge amount of criticism to that therapy because it seems not empirically correct. Unconscious is not that you all deal with. We are not going to restrict to desires and drives all the time, and it is inexpensive, cannot be used with old people, and umpteen amount of concerns. So now let's begin with existential therapy. See, existential therapy owns its origin to European philosophers like Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Kierkegaard. Later, the three pioneers of the existential therapy actually went through life-taking experiences. Extreme life experiences was something which perpetuated questions like, is existence really worthwhile? So they questioned God, aesthetic, religion, and the existence of death and life. So all the three pioneers, which was Viktor Frankl, Irvin Yalom, and Rollo May. Viktor Frankl was a survivor of World War, where his own partner was a part of gas chambers, etc. So existential therapy is not very well defined, not very structured like the other, and the approach is very separate from that, not very aligned, more philosophical in approach, as we stated. So it's very philosophical, has deeper questions of philosophy, talks about meaning making of life, talks about answering the existence of life, does have a very philosophical context to it. Not very, I would say it is not, as stated also, not a very concrete model. Here, answers can be many of one question. So it's again loses on empirical base, cannot be stated as very scientific, as stated. It's altogether a separate school. Humanism and existential is altogether a separate school, and this approach actually talks about existence, questions the existence of human suffering, the meaninglessness, the existence of God, the existence of Almighty. uh, why is death reached, how it is reached, and what is meaninglessness and meaningfulness to people. So that completes with existential therapy as an introduction today. Thank you.